So guys, welcome. My name's Justin Hast. I'm a watch photographer, a writer, most importantly a watch lover, and I'm incredibly excited to be here in Copenhagen at Bruun Rasmussen with Vilhelm Bramsen, the head of the watch department. And today we're looking at a very special auction that's online now, and it's a collection from one Danish collector of 80 plus classic size 35, 36 millimeter dress watches. William, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for your arrival here.
Pleasure. So let's just start, I think, by getting a picture of who this is that's putting this out there for us.
Well, as you said, it's a collection of dress watches, actually 84 dress watches in total. And there's not a lot of variation apart from the brands. Obviously, most of them are made in 14 karat gold and 18 karat gold, and some of them are gilded. But what kind of collector collects only that, so we're dealing with a very passionate person, a very passionate man. A lot of the brands are very known as Universal or Jeu de Cultre, but we also have a lot of very unknown brands, but that have a very historical importance.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll get into that later as well.
It's almost like any watch lover's dream that you could spend your whole life chasing and hunting these beautiful things down that maybe are only now coming to prominence, because we see a shift from, say, larger sort of sports, oversized sports watches maybe in the last 5-10 years to now people, particularly younger demographics, appreciating a smaller size. What was this obsession? Because it's all time only as well.
This is all time only. There's no other functionalities.
Yeah.
A few of them though have date,
Mm-hmm.
especially the Alcatrons have some date as well. I think the obsession has been, mainly 40s, 50s, 60s dress watches that you usually see on someone wearing, a tuxedo or some kind of other formal wear. As you said, today, a woman could use these as just as much as a man could, but it's also something that you're able to dress up in other ways. So we've seen a lot of rising prices for these more classical watches if they're from the right brand, the right condition, and the right functionality. And hopefully, people here in Denmark and abroad can see the same.
It's interesting because the rise of these older pieces has almost given us something to dive into as collectors and enthusiasts, because we see brands maybe that we're not familiar with now. I think one of the brands we probably are more familiar with is Universal Genève, who have had a prominent rise in the last few years, and you happen to have a few very special pull routers.
We do.
Talk to me through your first one.
Well, the first one here is, just so people are clear, it actually started as the Pola router in 1954, and it changed its name in 1955 to Pola router. It was the first design, or one of the first designs, by Gerald Denta. He was only 23 years old, and it was made to commemorate a SAS, the airline system here in Scandinavia's flight above the North Pole and to the US. And this was a kind of a groundbreaking thing, because back in the day, which is not as usual as today, all these watches, they had a certain function. So the function for this watch would be to withstand the magnetism that you find at the poles as much as the aircraft has to be able to. So that is why and how it is born.
From a design perspective, it's distinctive because of its thick case and its thick lugs. It's only 35, 36 millimeters, but it wears a little bit bigger because of it.
Oh, for sure. And then the most interesting thing about these Universals, especially the Polar's, is they started manufacturing them in 1954 with a bumper movement, and in 1955 it got replaced by a micro rotor. So you can see on some of the later versions they are actually a bit thinner, and you'd find them because it's on the same plane as everything else, which is a very nice detail. Actually, something that Patek Philippe used later on. Yeah.
And what about the dials? Because they're special as well. They're very distinctive.
The dials are very distinctive. They have like a sort of sectoral area, which has this one here is black, which is one of my absolute favorites.
And as well as the black, we've also then got a gold variation.
We have the gold variation, and just a very, very crisp look in general. And
you look at that sort of that track around the perimeter in contrast with the dial itself, and then these small loom plots. I mean, the detail's just incredible. There's so much to enjoy there.
It's a very well thought watch design, that's for sure.
It's interesting that most people will recognise Giro Genta as a designer for some bigger watches that we know of, and
definitely,
and fewer appreciate that he also designed the Constellation for Omega and this beauty. You
have to start somewhere.
Yeah, we've only 24 when he designed it. So where do we go from here? So we've got how many of these do we have then in the sale?
We have 2 pole routers in the sale, and we have a lot of different other kinds of universal watches. One of them I've actually brought with us.
We should actually, before we move on,
sure.
touch on that, because that's something special, no?
As I said, the Universal Genève Polar Router series started in 1954, meaning that this case is the earliest case that we have, and as far as I know, it's only been produced in that 1 year. And you can see on it, it says the actual flight, the Royal Viking SAS flight. So this is just an amazing piece of history. Unfortunately, we don't have a Polar Router watch, as they are very rare, and even more rare in good condition.
Beautiful. And let's move on from there to, say, the Chopard. What are we looking at here?
Oh, we're looking at something a lot of people don't realize also comes as a wristwatch. So Chopard is very known for making movements. Mainly they've made movements back in the day for Rolex, and especially Panerai. They made the movement for the Panerai 3646. I remember actually we have on auction here later this year. It's just a very amazing watch to look at, especially when you see, I mean, a lot of people have asked me, why are you putting 80 watches of the same style on auction at once? But once you really get into it and you look at the details, and you especially look at the minute details on the dial, you kind of understand why these were popular in the heyday.
And if you look at the case back there, there's an engraving on the back.
Yeah. There's a Juilliard cross, and the Joseph wording, and then the case back number. And as most of these watches, they are just in incredible condition, even further proving that the collector has just had a very good eye on keeping these babies really, really well made.
Do we have any indication as to whether he wore, once he acquired them, did he end up wearing them a lot? Or?
I could think that there would have been some kind of rotation, but when a collection spans, with such a number, it'd be impossible to wear them all. But maybe he's just had them as his little collection, just to watch and look at and sometimes wear. I mean, it must be hard to choose between 80 different watches every day.
And as I came in today, you said, Just, you've got to have a listen to this Boulevard. And you can obviously hear the frequency there. So a classic sort of 70s shape and design there. Yeah,
the barrel form and the barrel shape. It's a nice watch. The Acatron, it came in 1960. When it came out, it actually brought some new kind of, media coverage, especially from radio, but also television. And it's, as according to what I know, or it is, the world's first electronic tuning fork watch.
And Boulevard were the first to have an advert on radio as well at the time, which was interesting. Illustrious background from a historical standpoint. But what's interesting to me is that we're seeing a lot of reissues from brands that are taking a lot of the design cues that we see in these and then bringing them to life. But it's wonderful to see that in such great condition. We've also got an inscription on the back.
Yes.
As some of these do in the collection.
Some of them have description or inscriptions on the back. Obviously,
from Debbie.
Yeah, this is from Debbie with love, as I can see. So it's something that the collector has amassed during, possibly a 30-year period on different auctions or with different people, and some of them have been, personal items of collectors before him.
I think there's nothing more interesting than having a bit of history and a lineage there as well. When you put it on, it does make you think about where it's been.
For sure.
Again, moving on to maybe something that, a name that certain people will be more familiar with, but this beautiful, elegant Jaeger LeCoultre box, and this incredibly delicate, that is with this sort of satin style brush dial. That is just sublime.
Definitely.
In 14 karat gold, 34 millimeters.
They're all a real big piece of history. Just the look, you can see like the fashion that's all engraved in them. It's been a wonderful collection to work with, because you kind of you see a new watch and you kind of fall in love with it until you see the next one, and you understand the idea behind their designs. It's just amazing.
And we've got a classic sort of dial layout here of the time. We've got these sort of dagger hands with the baton with the Arabic numeral. very elegant, very sort of, especially on the profile, just something that really. It's interesting. You always hear new watches being described as they can fit under the cuff.
Yeah.
You didn't really need to say that back then because this was just.
It had to fit under the cuff. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so that's a beauty. And then maybe let's hop over again to another show part that we've got.
Yeah.
So another very elegant watch, sort of a cushion style case.
It is a very, very cushion style case, more indicative of the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And just in total, it's a very small watch for a lot of men today. But at the time, together with all these other watches, that was just the size. And I think it's a perfect size when it has the aesthetics with it. I mean, if I had to make a watch today, I wouldn't make it that small. But looking at something that's from the period, I mean, it's just perfect.
Those Roman numerals just so elegant, without running second hand. So all you have to go on is just that reassuring tick in the back.
Hopefully, the ticking, yeah.
And Vilhelm, thank you for showing me. What would you consider to be the highlights for you in the collection? What are you most excited about seeing?
Well, the highlights for me, apart from what we have here, is actually a collaboration between Universal and Bulova, which is encapsulated in this particular 18-karat gold watch, which is their Unisonic model. And it says Universal Genève, but if you look closely, you can see on the printed dial that it is both a Bulova tuning fork and it is the Universal logo.
And that's not something you see very often.
That is not something you see very often, and I had to double check it the first time I saw it. And having it in the gold casing, I mean, it's actually a Universal and Bulova movement inside, or it's a Bulova movement that's been modified by Universal.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think that those two competing companies would go together to help each other. I mean, obviously a lot of the movement information has been more viable at the time, but I just think this is such a cool story.
Yeah, I mean, just a wonderful thing to dive into if you're interested in taking things a little bit deeper than maybe the surface level.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to go really deep here.
And actually, just finally, with the watches we do have today, I had to say when I came in, I did have to double take because I didn't see a Patek for sale in this collection. But tell me what we're looking at here and why
we're looking at a Record Co, a watch co from Genève. And the thing is, as you said, it kind of feels and looks like the Patek you'd see, obviously, from around 45, 46, with the large lugs and the interchangeable from Arabic numerals, the dots.
Yeah.
It's just an amazing look, and you don't make a lot of watches today where the lugs have such a big standpoint in the design, and that's really what comes forth here. And as you said, it looks like a Patek from back in the day. And
actually, with those fancy lugs, you get a bit of extra size as well. So on the wrist, a little bit more presence, maybe.
Yeah.
That is just so elegant. It's something that you can see from across the room,
exactly.
And it sort of draws you in. I mean, if you saw that.
Yeah,
I'd have to do
a double take. I'd have to do a double take.
You have to go and ask a question.
I think what we have to say as well is a lot of these watches are really good at, as your first watch, if you're into collecting. There's no reason to start with a $50,000 sports watch when you actually can find something and work your way up from there. So this can be either your first watch, your next watch. They're just, great reference points. The history behind them is so important to understand how the movements work today, especially with everything from Zenith to Eterna. We also have the gold watch version of them. And if we didn't have a lot of these companies, we wouldn't have the big brands we're looking at today. And also a lot of the movements that you find in sports watches are directly descendant from a lot of these watches.
It's a good point. I think it's also fair to say that if you went for one of these now, maybe as an early watch in your collecting journey, it's one that you're guaranteed to stick with for the years to come, because we it's not something that... Fashion is not something we're looking at here. This is something that has an enduring appeal. And I've always thought, particularly younger collectors, seeing someone who chooses something a little bit off of the beaten path is so much more interesting than seeing something off the shelf that they can buy at any boutique. So
definitely. I mean, they all have a story, which is nice. And I've always liked to buy watches also so I could sit at the dinner table and someone asks me, well, you see, and there you go. But furthermore, I mean, what's even more amazing is, apart from the condition, and they're all in working order, you also get them with sometimes the original buckle, the original strap, and even more amazing, the original boxes. you just don't see watches from that period come with anything other than watch only. And having a collection that is so big, I mean, we remember when it came to our department and we just saw it in front of us. What you usually do with this kind of collections when they're all the same style is that you slowly weed them out in different auctions so you don't kind of drown the market in the same. But what we thought here is, why not give it a go? We can kind of see the time is ripe. A lot of people are beginning to start, looking at more historical watches and not just big brand names. So what we've already gotten from our feedback is just great, and it's an amazing opportunity.
And they're online now?
They are online now, and we've actually been doing a bit more than just our usual. We've had some different kind of pictures, but I've also, as an historian, tried to put a bit of a context to a lot of the watches, because I understand why, if you go to look at, for example, the record watch company and you've never heard of it, well, why should you buy it? It's just because the material is gold? No. We built up a context so you can kind of get an idea, but it's also a tool so that you can look further on your own.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm really, really excited to see how they do.
So am I.